We got to understand here the educational program that you have to be able to figure out whether it will go on the right lines where the people will end up in a situation where they can be able to really control themselves. You understand what I'm saying? With no education, the people take this local foundation and start stealing money because they won't be really educated to why it's the people's thing anyway. You understand what I'm saying? With no education, you have neo-colonialism instead of colonialism, like you got in Africa 9, like you got in Haiti. So what we're talking about is there has to be educational program. That's very important. As a matter of fact, it's so important for us that a person has to go through 6 weeks of our political education before he can consider himself a member of the party, able to even run down ideology for the party. Why? Because if they don't have an education, then they're nowhere. You dig what I'm saying? They're nowhere because they don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. You might get people caught up in the emotionalist movement. You understand me? You might get them caught up in because they're poor and they want something. And then if they're not educated, they want more. And before you know it, they'll be capitalists. And before you know it, we have Negro imperialists.
This educational process is necessary, and it's the people that will cause the revolution, and it's the people that will cause the change in the country. It's simply the vanguard of the revolution, and we plan to teach the people the strategy and the necessary tools to liberate themselves.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. For purposes of this discussion, my name is Brother Akendo. Those of you here who know who I am know who I am. And today we are going to discuss the life, the legacy, the liberation, history of Assata Shakur. Some of the information that's shared here today, a lot of y'all probably don't know. But when you leave here today, you should know more about our sister, our struggle, and her contributions to New African Revolutionary Nationalism than you did when you came in. Assata Olugbala Shakur was born July 16, 1947 as Joanne Deborah Byron. A lot of y'all know her as Joanne Chesmore. That's a name she only picked up later on in life. She was a genuine revolutionary. Initially, she was a member of the Black Panther Party. And then, you all know, she became a member of the Black Liberation Army. She was born in Queens, New York. She lived there for 3 years with her mother, school teacher named Doris E. Johnson, and her retired grandparents, Lula and Frank Hill. She later changed her name to Joanne Chesmore. Assata spent much of her childhood life shuttling between New York and North Carolina. So she had an opportunity to see the oppression of black people up close in the North and the South. Her grandparents, they ran a restaurant down there in North Carolina. Her father was an accountant, and her mom was a school teacher. Soon after she was born, they divorced. Her family struggled financially, and they argued feet. All the time, Assata would run away from home. Sometimes staying in strangers' houses or working for short periods of time here and there. And mind you, this was in the 1950s. She was ultimately taken in by her mother's sister, Evelyn A. Williams, a civil rights worker who lived in Manhattan. Assata said that her aunt was the heroine of her childhood, and she was constantly introducing her to new things, stuff she'd never heard of. In one interview, she was quoted as saying that her aunt was, quote, very sophisticated, knew all kinds of things. She was right up my alley because I was forever asking all kinds of questions. I wanted to know everything, unquote. Assata attended an all-girls Cathedral High School. It was a Catholic school, 6 months before transferring to public high school, which she attended for a while before dropping out. Her experience with formal public school systems was similar to all of our experiences with systems of indoctrination, when you've experienced colonialism. And I'm talking about domestic colonialism like we as New Africans have. Her aunt helped her later on earn her GED. She took her to museums and theaters and art galleries exposed to the culture and true New African history. Assata spent little time at home. She was always on the move. It was an interesting life she had as a child growing up. because it also exposed her consistently to the contradictions that were inherent in the system of capitalism and white supremacy. She saw it up close. She understood when she was taking these classes in high school and junior high school that she was taught a sugar-coated version of history that ignored the oppression suffered by people of color, especially in the United States. If y'all recall in her own autobiography, she was quoted as saying, "I didn't know what a fool they had made out of me until I grew up and started to read real history." This is one of the primary reasons understanding New African history is so vital. It's almost impossible to relate to the world of the productive system properly if you don't know where you came from, who you are, or what you're a part of. Assata attended Moreau Manhattan Community College, BMCC, and then the City College of New York in the mid-1960s. And mind you, there was a lot going on in the mid-1960s. You had the student movement going on to try to force them to bring ethnic studies to college campuses. And this was going on both coasts. You had the Black Liberation Movement in full swing. You had the anti-war movement. You had the Chicano rights movement. You had the American Indian movement. I mean, people was actually trying to get free at this time period in history. It was a dynamic time. And this is the time Assata was exposed to being an adult woman in an academic environment that was engaged in struggle. She became involved in many political activities, civil rights protests, sit-ins. She traced her interest in communism to a 1964 debate about the Vietnam War with several African students attending Columbia University. Assata was quoted as saying, "I continued saying the first thing that came into my head, that the U.S. was fighting communists because they wanted to take over everything. I opened my mouth to answer, then realized I didn't have an answer or the faintest idea when I was asked the question, what is communism? My image of communists came from a cartoon. It was a spy with a black trench coat and a black hat, pulled down over his face, slinking around corners. I knew I didn't know what the hell communism was, yet I'd been dead set against it my entire life. I will never forget that day. Only a fool let somebody else tell him who his enemy is," unquote. In 1967, our sister was arrested for the first time, with 100 other BMCC students on charges of trespass. The students had chained and locked the entrance to the college building to protest the low numbers of black faculty and the lack of a black studies program. After graduation, she adopted the name Assata Shakur and moved to Oakland, California, where she joined the Black Panther Party and worked to organize protests and community education programs. After returning to New York City, she led the BP chapter in Harlem, coordinating the Free Beckers program for children, the free clinics, and the community outreach. Remember, she was studying to be a nurse, but she soon left the party, disliking the patriarchal authoritarianism, that macho behavior that she saw out of a lot of the men that was part of the BPP. And she also noted that when she engaged some of the brothers as it related to New African history, they simply didn't know their own history. And she really didn't like this lack of understanding of New African history. She joined the Black Liberation Army as a result. The BLA was a confederation of comrades from all over the United States, derived from formations as diverse as the Black Panther Party and Revolutionary Action Movement, the members of Walter Gotti Jamal, and the Black Brigade, some of which were inspired by the Viet Cong and the Algerian independence fighters of the Battle of Algiers. Some of you here might be familiar with Frantz Fanon's book, Wretched of the Earth. That book came out of the true life experiences of the Battle of Algiers. And it was often a tome often quoted by members of the BLA. They mounted a campaign of guerrilla activities against the U.S. government, using a variety of armed tactics from planting bombs to holding up banks, from battling syndicates to destroying drug dealers and racist police. They didn't pull no punches. They actually engaged in genuine resistance that would push our people away from the oppressor state and into their own independent national space. When she changed her name to Assata Olugbala Shakur in 1971, it was a conscious decision, rejecting the name Joanne Chesmore or Joanne Bible as a slave name. Assata is a West African name. It's derived from Aisha. It means she who struggles, while Shakur means thankful one in Arabic. Olugbala, a name that's also shared by our brother Abdul Olugbala Shakur, means savior in Yoruba. She knew herself to be an African woman in America and knew that taking control of one's self-identity was one of the first steps in decolonization. She said in her own words, quote, "It sounded so strange when people called me Joanne. It really had nothing to do with me. I didn't feel like no Joanne or no Negro or no American. I felt like an African woman," unquote. On April 6, 1971, Assata was in an operation to neutralize some drug dealers peddling poison to our people out of the Statter Hilton Hotel in Manhattan. The eye went sideways, and I saw the stomach during the struggle with one of the dope pushers in the Midtown Manhattan. Pigs actually arrested her, accusing her of trying to rob the room's residents. In 1987, during the interview, Assata confirmed to a journalist that there was a drug connection in that incident, but she refused to elaborate on exactly what was going down. She was booked on charges of attempted robbery, assault, reckless endangerment, and possession of a deadly weapon, then released on bail. Assata was heard saying that she was glad that she had been shot afterward. She was no longer afraid of getting shot by a gun. Following an August 23rd, 1971 bank robbery in Queens, the Big saw. They was trying to say a black woman was with the dudes that actually, held the bank up. They had been circulating a photograph of a woman who they was alleging was Assata, wearing thick-rimmed black glasses with a high hairdo pulled tightly over her head, pointing a gun. And this was like, circulated all over the news and every bank in the area. Hell, the New York Clearinghouse Association paid for a full-page ad displaying these unproven allegations against our sister. In 1987, when she was asked in Cuba about police allegations that the BLA gained funds by Assata responded, "Well, there were expropriations. There were bank robberies," unquote. It's central to understand the ideological foundation and premise of appropriations operations at that time. Understand the United States of America had become the United States of America because they got 365 years of free labor from enslaved Africans. The vast majority of the money that was being lended to corporations and other companies and people by banks was money that was generated off the backs, blood, death, and human misery of slaves. Expropriations were legitimate, as viewed through the prism of an objective history. Assata understood that. BLA understood that. On December 21st, 1971, Assata was named by the New York Police Department as one of 4 suspects in a hand grenade attack that destroyed a police car and injured 2 officers in Mass F, Queens. When a so-called witness identified Assata and a brother named Andrew Jackson from an FBI photo lineup, a 13-state APB was issued 3 days after that attack. Law enforcement officials in Atlanta, Georgia, said that Assata and Andrew had lived together in Atlanta for several months in the summer of 1971. Assata was wanted for questioning for wounding a police officer on January 26, 1972, who was attempting to serve a summons for a traffic violation in Brooklyn. After $89,000 Brooklyn bank robbery on March 1st, 1972, a Daily News headline asked, "Was that Joanne?" Assata was identified. It was wanted for questioning after that 1972 bank robbery in the Bronx. And that same year, Assata became the subject of a nationwide manhunt after the FBI, during the height of the counterintelligence program, said that she led the Black Liberation Army cell that had conducted a, quote, series of cold-blooded murders in New York City police officers, unquote. The FBI said these included an execution-style murder of New York City police officers Joseph Piangentini and Waverly Jones on May 21st, 1971, and NYPD officers Gregory Foster and Rocco Laurie on January 28, 1972. Big suggested that Assata had been directly involved in the Foster and Lowry killings, and involved tangentially with the Piangentini and Jones killing. Some named source, some rat, claimed Assata was the de facto head of the BLA after the arrest of Comrade DeRuba Moore. Robert Daley was deputy commissioner of New York City Police at the time, for example, described Assata as, quote, the final wanted fugitive, the soul of the BLA, the mother hen who kept them together, kept them moving, and kept them shooting, unquote. The pigs had this idea of Assata that they wanted to implant in the minds of the public. They wanted to vilify it. They actually referred to the BLA not as a political formation or an armed military formation, resisting against oppression in the United States. They tried to refer to them like they did the same thing they did to the BPP and any other formation that was actually organized in resistance against them as a gang. Some years later now, one of those same officers admitted that they had created this myth around Assata, intentionally exaggerating her potential threat to demonize her because she was, quote, educated, young, and pretty. By February 17, 1972, when Assata was identified as one of 4 BLA members on a short trip to Chattanooga, Tennessee, she was wanted for questioning along with Robert Vickers, Tyman Meyer, Samuel Cooper, Paul Stewart, and a couple other comrades in relation to a police killing, a Queens bank robbery, a grenade attack on the cops, and some other stuff. Assata was reported as one of 6 suspects in the ambushing of 4 policemen in Jamaica, Queens, and 2 in Brooklyn on January 28, 1973. On April 16, 71, Assata was allegedly in the backseat of a van the police tried to say somehow connected with a burglary that was on the other side of New York. Now, after this vehicle was pulled over, 2 men stepped out of that vehicle and opened fire on NYPD officers John Scarginella and Richard Rain. The 2 men were charged with the murder of Scarginella and the attempted murder of Rain. By June 1973, an apparatus that would later become the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, the JTTF, was issuing nearly daily briefings on Assata, her status, and the allegations against her. Now, mind you, a lot of these allegations were made up. They never really happened. According to Kathleen Cleaver, on the Comrade George Kostikopoulos, the FBI and local police initiated a national search and destroy mission for suspected BLA members, collaborating in stakeouts that were the product of intensive political repression and counterintelligence campaigns like Operation New Kill. Now, for those of y'all who know what Operation New Kill was, it was a counterintelligence program. It was the same counterintelligence program that targeted Jalil Muttaqin. They attempted to tie Assata to every suspected action of the BLA that involved a woman. The JTTF would later serve as the coordinating body in the search for Assata and the renewed campaign to destroy the BLA. And this was after her escape from prison. So for those who don't know, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, one that y'all hear about all the time on the news, it came into being because of Assata. To really understand the depths of fabricated news associated with the counterintelligence program operations at that time, after Assata was captured, what happened on that turnpike? She wasn't charged with any of the crimes of which she was purportedly the subject of these many manhunts. Let that sink in for a minute. I ran down to you like 19 or 20 different hot ones, and they implicated us in every one. She wasn't tried for a single one of those. She was targeted by the FBI's counterintelligence program as a result of her involvement with the many black liberation organizations and struggles for resistance that were occurring at the time. Specific documented evidence suggests that Assata was targeted by an investigation named Operation Chaz Rob, which attempted to hook former New York City Panther Joanne Chesmore, i.e. Assata, to virtually every bank robbery or violent crime involving a black woman on the East Coast. Although named after Assata, Chaz Rob, like its predecessor New Kill, was not limited to her. They used that op to try to wrangle in any associate, affiliate, or person they knew to be or had a suspicion of being associated with the Black Liberation Army. Years later, when Assata was living in Cuba, she was asked about the BLA's alleged involvement in the killings of police officers. Our sister was clear and frank. She said, and I quote, "In reality, armed struggle historically has been used by people to liberate themselves. But the question lies in when do people use armed struggle? There were people in the BLA who absolutely took the position that it was just time to resist. And if black people didn't start to fight back against police brutality and didn't start to wage armed resistance, we will be annihilated," unquote. Between 1971 and 1973, the Pigs charged Assata with several crimes, leading to a multi-state manhunt. On May 2nd, 1973, Assata, along with BLA comrades Zaid, Malik, Shakur, and Sundiata Kohli, was stopped on the New Jersey Turnpike. The Pigs, of course, attempted to engage in the normal police brutality of the day, and the encounter escalated into a shootout with state troopers Warner Forster and James Harper. Forster was killed, and Harper was wounded. Comrade Zaid was also killed, and both Assata and Comrade Sundiata were wounded, with gunshot wounds in both arms and the shoulder. Mind you, she was shot when she was raising her hands to surrender. Assata was moved to Middlesex General Hospital on a heavy guard and was reported to be in, quote, serious condition. Now, mind you, both of those gunshots was in and out. It was the treatment she received in that hospital, which put her in the serious condition she was in. Now, Trooper Harper was shot as well. He was wounded in his left shoulder, but he was reportedly in good condition. Assata was beaten, interrogated, and ran from her hospital bed. Her defense team alleged that her medical care during this period was, quote, substandard. She was transferred from Middlesex General Hospital in New Brunswick to Roosevelt Hospital in Edison after her lawyers obtained a court order from Judge John Beckman. Judge Beckman said she was to be transferred, and she was a few weeks later to Middlesex County Workhouse. During an interview, Assata discussed her treatment by the police and medical staff at Middlesex General Hospital. She said the police beat and choked her and were doing everything that they could possibly do as soon as the doctors and nurses would go outside. So every time they went in to check her IV or change her bandages, the moment they left that room, they commenced choking and beating on our sister. Between 1973 and 1977 in New York and New Jersey, Assata was indicted 10 times, resulting in 7 different criminal trials. She was charged with 2 bank robberies, kidnapping of a Brooklyn heroin dealer, the attempted murder of 2 Queens police officers stemming from a January 23rd, 1973 failed ambush, and 8 other felonies related to the Turnpike shootout. Of these trials, 3 resulted in acquittals. 1, a hung jury. 1, a change of venue, and 1 in the mistrial due to pregnancy. And 1, and just 1, in conviction. 3 indictments were dismissed without trial at all. They were absolute fabrications, made up, part of the counterintelligence program. After her 1977 trial, Sundiata Kohli, Assata Trooper Harper, and a New Jersey Turnpike driver who saw part of the incident on that turnpike were the only surviving witnesses. Now, Sundiata did not testify or make any pretrial statements, nor did he testify in his own trial or give a statement to the police. The driver traveling north on the turnpike testified that he had seen a state trooper struggling with a black man between a white vehicle and a state trooper car, whose revolving lights illuminated the area. Assata testified that Trooper Harper shot her after her raised arms was up in the air to comply. He shot her again in the back as she turned to avoid it. And then she fell onto the road for the duration of the gunfight before crawling back into the backseat of that Pontiac. Akoli was able to drive that car 5 miles down the road before he parked it and jumped out, because they was only right down the road from the Turnpike administration. She testified that she remained there until state troopers dragged her out onto the road, where they beat her some more. Assata was convicted on multiple charges, including for killing Forrester and the assault on Harper. She was sentenced to life plus 26 to 33 years in prison. Assata maintained that she could not have fired the shots that wounded Harper and killed Forrester, as her right arm had been injured by police gunfire early in the confrontation. Now dig this. I want y'all to really understand what I'm going to tell you right now. There was medical evidence introduced in her trial. You had a neurosurgeon by the name of Dr. Arthur Turner, last name Davis. He was an associate professor of surgery at the Albert Einstein School of Medicine. He testified that the wounds in her upper arms, armpit, and chest, and the upper arm wounds was when she got shot in the back through her scapula. They severed the median nerve that instantly paralyzed her right arm. It would only have been caused if both of her arms were raised in the air, and that sustaining such injuries while crouching and firing a weapon as described by this pig was anatomically impossible. It couldn't have happened. They shot this sister while she was raising her hands up, and when she tried to turn away from the first bullet, he shot her again in the back. That's what really happened to Assata. While serving her sentence at the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey, Assata escaped in 1979 and comrades from the May 19 Communist Organization. Something that a lot of people today's time just don't really get, right, is we all worked together back then. At that time period in history, and I'm talking about across the country, you could take it to the Third World Liberation Front, was a coalition of students at Berkeley and San Francisco State University. And there you had some of them that was from the Black Student Union, some of them from the Chicano Student Union, you had some of them from the American Indian Movement, you had some of them from the Asian American and Pacific Indian Movement. You had the same thing going on in every type of struggle that was occurring, whether it was liberation with us, the Weather Underground, Brown Berets, our brothers in NETA, the Puerto Rican Liberation Front, to the anti-war movement. There was genuine cross-cultural consolidation because we all understood enemy. We had the same beast we was fighting. That beast was capitalism and white supremacy. That was the enemy. It was not each other. And it was that type of multi, I'm loath to use the term multicultural, but it was that type of political consolidation across cultural spheres that allowed us to be as successful as we was, and why they went to such lengths to destroy that union and to vilify those brothers and sisters like Assata, who were the champions of resistance. This how that escape actually jumped off. On November 2nd, 1979, Three members of the BLA visiting her drew concealed .45 caliber pistols, and they had a stick of dynamite. They seized two of them correctional officers and dragged them away as hostages. They commandeered a van with the assistance of those brothers and sisters from the May 19th organization, and they got away. They got little, and they was gone. No one was injured during that prison break, including the officers held as hostages who were left in the parking lot. They didn't even take them with them. According to later court testimony, Assata lived in Pittsburgh until August 1980, when she flew to the Bahamas. According to them, Mutulu Shakur, Sylvia Barandini, Seiko Odinga, and Marilyn Buck were charged with assisting her in that escape. Now, mind you, they gave Marilyn Buck all that time in the feds, not for this lick, but because she had a box of bullets. Wrap your head around that. Ronald Boyd Hill was also held on charges related to this escape. In part for his role in the event, Mutulu was named on July 23, 1982 as the 380th addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, where he remained for the next 4 years until he was finally captured in 1986, and they locked our brother up. State corrections officials disclosed in November '79 that they had not run identity checks on any of Assata's visitors, and that the 3 men and 1 woman who assisted her in her escape had presented false ID to enter the prison's visiting room, before which they were not searched. Mutulu Shakur and Marilyn were convicted in 1988 of several Brinks robberies and other bank robberies, as well as the prison escape. Assata was granted asylum in Cuba in 1984, where she resided for the remainder of her life, despite ongoing efforts by the U.S. government to extradite her. In 2013, the FBI added her to the FBI's most wanted terrorist list under the name of Joanne Deborah Chesmore, making her the first woman to ever make that list. When this orange clown got, according to later court testimony, Assata lived in Pittsburgh until August of 1980 after her escape, when she flew to the Bahamas. Mutulu Shakur, Sylvia Barandini, Seiko Odinga, and Marilyn Buck were all charged with assisting her in escaping. Ronald Boyd Hill was also held on charges related to that escape. In part for his role in the event, Mutulu was named on July 23, 1982 as the 380th addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, where he remained for the next 4 years until his capture in 1986. State corrections officials disclosed in November of '79 that they had not run identity checks on Assata's visitors, and that the 3 men and 1 woman who assisted her in that escape had presented false ID to enter that prison's visiting room before they were not searched. And they tried to suggest it was because of these lapses why they was able to pull this lick off. Mutulu Shakur and Marilyn Buck were convicted in 1988 of several robberies, including that Brinks robbery, as well as that prison escape. Even though they dropped all those charges against Marilyn, except having that box of bullets. Assata was granted political asylum in Cuba in 1984, where she resided for the remainder of her life, despite ongoing efforts by the U.S. government to secure her extradition. In 2013, the FBI added her to the FBI's most wanted terrorist list under the name Joanne Deborah Chesmore, making her the first woman to be listed. When this clown, this orange dude that's in office right now, got in office, they moved her up on the 10 most wanted list to number 2 and raised the bounty for her from $1 million to $2 million. Assata still stayed free. Our precious sister died 3 days ago, as you all know, on September 25th, 2025, at the age of 1978, with her daughter, Kukuya, there. The legacy of Assata Shakur, for men like myself and for those who share our belief system, is comparable to the legacy of the homemade Amazons and the legacy of resistance that was given by Nanny Foster. She was a warrior. She was a teacher. She was a guerrilla. She was what every last one of us hold dear in our hearts as the preeminent example of what a woman should be, what every woman should aspire to be. One that knows who she is, understands her relationship to the reproductive system, and seeks to change the world for the better.